Good morning, everyone. You actually say it like you believe it. I fully expect some of you to be like, I don't know why people keep calling it good. Don't you know that we lost an hour of sleep last night? I do. I can feel it. I bet you can too. But it is good to be with you today, and you're singing beautifully already. So I really do feel like it's just another classic Sunday at Christ Church. I'm glad that you're here and glad to be here with you. I had this occasion this week to go back and review a couple of stories that I am familiar with because they have brought me great joy and laughter through the years. They took a different route this week, but they are the stories of a number of my favorite comedians and how they found the moment where they decided, like, oh, this is it. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Most of them are way too inappropriate to share on a Sunday morning, so I'm not going to share them. I want to share two of them. One of them will be actually important. The other one I just love. You know Zach Galifianakis? Kind of looks a little bit like a modern-day Hobbit. Really deadpan delivery on his comedy. That's actually how he started. He didn't develop that over time. He was doing an amateur night on like a Thursday night in a club in the middle of nowhere, and told a joke that I can't tell you. You'll just have to trust me that the punchline, the thing that he expected to deliver so that people would start laughing, revolved around rhyming crouton and futon. And he said that he literally heard a fork drop off a table, and that's it. And that he, instead of taking that as a sign that maybe he should go a different route, said, that's it. That's what I want for the rest of my life, is to be able to deliver jokes that make people just sit there and stare at me. And he's done it somehow. The one that I truly love is Jerry Seinfeld's. He tells the story of being in elementary school, and the first time he ever made someone laugh so hard that milk came out of their nose at the lunchroom table. And he tells it as if he's, you remember the movie The Matrix when everything can like slow down all of a sudden? He tells it as if that moment stretched on forever, that he saw the atomized spray of milk coming at him in bullet time. And during that, he thought to himself, if I can find a way to get this reaction from people for the rest of my life, I'll be there. That's it. And that's when he decided that he would become a professional comedian. As you can imagine, though he was good at it, though any of these stories of folks are stories of people who had this kind of natural inclination toward doing this thing that they were made for, none of them were good at it truly right off the bat. They all had to hone their craft, right? They all really had to get into the mind of an audience member and figure out what it is that makes this person laugh. They had to develop their stories, and they had to learn from other great comedians so that they could begin to hone their craft and practice it in such a way that they could truly become masters. I want you to hold that idea about honing a craft, about what it is to move from being an amateur toward being an expert at anything. Hold that in your mind. I want to recall to you that we've been talking about covenants for many weeks now, and we're going to keep doing it for just 2 more weeks as we move into understanding what the new covenant is that we have with God through Jesus. And so far, we've heard about these covenants as the way in which God establishes a relationship with us and defines the contours of that set of relationships with us and calls us into participation in what God is up to in this world, primarily to restore peace and bring blessing to the world that God created to be a world of peace and blessing, but that we have found ways to corrupt somehow in creative ways every new chapter of the Bible. So we've heard about the way that God does that with individual families like the family of Abraham, and how God's going to find a way to call all the descendants of Abraham into participation in God's work to spread peace and blessing. We've heard about that with the way that God did it with a whole people group, the way that through Moses God calls all of the Israelites into a relationship with contours in which God will call them to be a people that work alongside God to spread peace and blessing. And how God has done that with an individual through whom God will do that with all humanity. And that was Noah's story, remember? They are the only people left on earth, so it's kind of easy for God to shrink it down. But God says to Noah, you and your family are going to be a part of restoring peace and blessing to this world. And every human that comes after you will be a part of this covenant, right? As I hope, and as I have personally experienced, I hope you've experienced, I've personally experienced, as we've trotted through some of these, we keep running into these places where every single time it seems that God has given us a new covenant, we are set up on the other side realizing what we've done with it. That somehow we've taken something that was so good, or at least had the potential to be so good, where God keeps showing up with God's kind of, expert level love, and we keep showing up looking like amateurs, right? Making a mess out of things. This is something that I am intensely familiar with because I'm an amateur at everything, and so I know quite well that an amateur with professional level tools is a dangerous human being. Right? I can show you the scars on my hands. I can show you the disaster of a renovation job I've been doing on my house for, what is it now, like a year and a half? Too long, that's all, right? That's what Casey would say, just too long. Call somebody and it's a professional. She keeps saying it. I keep ignoring her. I started at some point to follow like carpenters and tradesmen on Instagram so that I could try to learn their craft. So an amateur, not an apprentice, I don't have anybody teaching me. So I thought I would watch them on Instagram, and that's not helped, by the way. It's shown me how good they are and how bad I am, but it's not done the next thing, which is what we're really going to talk about today. But in the process of discovery, I have found also these accounts that show just how dangerous people like me can be, right? So there's one that is, I'll skip to the one that's, again, here's my favorite. It's an account that's called OSHA, Is This Okay? And it's the people like me on the first day of the job. It's the janitor that grabs that big floor polisher that you remember from the halls of your childhood elementary school, but instead of pushing it this way, they do the thing where they just keep spinning, right? It's that kind of stuff. Some of it's a lot worse than that. But somehow, we all know professional tools in the hands of amateurs can somehow be turned into dangerous things. That is a piece of the story of these covenants that we keep running into. That somehow God keeps establishing these tools, these instruments of mercy and peace and forgiveness and love. God keeps showing up with this expert level love, and we keep showing up with our amateurism and taking even those tools for love and turning them into our instruments of pain, right? Such that even the covenants become an instrument for us to heap shame on one another instead of an opportunity for us to find grace. Most of you, I saw this after last week, most of you, when you remember those 10 commandments, most of you will remember those in terms of them being taught to you as an agent of shame, really, rather than an indication of the grace that preceded them. That's often what we do. There's no greater example of this than the very story of Jesus. A story that is about God putting God's ultimate tool of love into this universe to do God's healing work. And how in the world did we find a way to turn that into a story of death? But we did. The amazing thing about all these covenants that we keep coming back to, and especially the covenant that we have with God through Jesus, is that even somehow God finds a way, even with our proclivity, to turn these instruments of love into instruments of pain. God can even use that to accomplish God's promises. God's fundamental ministry seems to be taking our instruments of pain, those things that we use to harm one another, and turning them into instruments of healing. Jesus refers back to one of those instances today. You can hear it just barely in this section that we have when Jesus says, just like Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Moses is guiding the children of Israel through the wilderness after they've received the 10 Commandments, and they wander through the desert for 40 years before they ever come to the place that God promised them. And people are being attacked by snakes. Long story. Moses is calling out, we've got to save these people. And God says to Moses, I know what we'll do. Take one of those serpents, put it on a pole, hoist the pole in the air, and anyone who gazes upon that serpent will be healed. God has turned the instrument, the very instrument of their pain, into the instrument of their healing, right? And Jesus says that as he tries to tell, in this case, Nicodemus, but tries to tell all of us, look what happens when I will be lifted up. How this instrument, this cross, this instrument and symbol of torture and pain and death is going to become the symbol of life and mercy and forgiveness. That's the goodness of this new relationship that we have with God through Jesus. Right? Solidified in that one statement. But even then, have you ever heard John 3:16 as a tool to heap shame upon people? Right? Usually the message that comes alongside the man wearing the sandwich board at the football stadium is not one of peace and love and mercy. Right? We find these ways. We found a way to execute Jesus. God found a way to turn that into the story of our redemption. I bring that up to you because part of the contour of this new relationship is not new at all. The contour of this covenant that we have with God through Jesus includes the same participation that God has offered to us in every other covenant that God has ever entered into with us. It's what God is always doing, right? Inviting us to participate. It was once the case, we might say, or we can look at it this way anyway, that in all the other covenants that preceded this one, God expected us to show up with the same level of professional love that God was exhibiting. This is my covenant loyalty to you, humans. Show up with yours. And we kept making a mess out of it. With Jesus, it's as if God says, bring me all of your amateur love. Bring me what you got. I'm not expecting you to be a professional. I know you're not going to be a professional. You'll never master this the way that I've mastered this. I am the God that is called the God of love. I am love. But I still need you to participate. So it shifts who we are from being children desperately trying to find a sort of perfection that allows us to say that we too are masters of this craft to apprentices. Sitting at the feet of our master, trying to learn, trying to practice, trying to do those things that hone our works of love in such a way that they bear the mark and resemble the very work that our Savior has done. Right? When you are an apprentice of anyone, over time, the hope is that your work will begin to look like your master's work, that you will gradually get better. You know that you're not going to be judged to the same standard as the master. Your job is to learn. How much different is it for us to approach the story of our salvation in that way? You and I have been granted the ability to learn from and be an apprentice of the greatest master of love the world has ever known, the very author of love. Not be judged as if we were supposed to be perfect, but instead to find our imperfection as a moment to learn so that gradually our product, our own love, will start to look like His. Over these next few weeks, we're going to approach the cross over and over again. On Palm Sunday, we will hear the entire story of Jesus' crucifixion and death again. Let this message sit with you that we hear today, that Jesus did not go to that cross to condemn the world. Jesus went to that cross so that we might be saved and that we might approach the light, that our deeds might be done in such a way that glorify God. That as Riley read from Ephesians, that our works that God prepared us to do, that our works might begin to bear the trademark of the author of love. Don't approach the cross this end of your Lenten season. Don't approach the cross during Holy Week. Don't approach the cross ever in such shame that you begin to think yourself a failed professional of love. But let the cross redefine your relationship to God in such a way that you know yourself to be an apprentice. Practice, learn, listen, watch the author of love do his work, and then go back to work yourself, trying more and more each day to do the works of love that more and more each day will resemble the work of your master.